Okay, let's go all the way back to the mid-2000s. The OG Saints Row actually started development in 2003 for the PS2 under an incredibly early 2000s working title Bling Bling. But then it morphed into an Xbox 360 exclusive and launched in 2006. And at the time, everyone was waiting for a new true next-gen sandbox crime game. GTA 4 was still a couple of years away and Volition saw a gap in the market. Not gonna lie, everyone called it a GTA clone back then, and to be fair, it absolutely was. Cause the whole core structure of driving around an urban environment, shooting rival gangs, and listening to licensed hip-hop on the radio was lifted directly from the Rockstar playbook. However, dismissing it as a mere copycat kinda ignores some of the innovations it brought to the table, which we'll talk about in a bit. It was set in a fictional city of Stillwater, heavily inspired by Detroit and Chicago, and it immediately set itself apart with an actual character creator. Instead of playing a predefined protagonist with a set backstory, you step into the shoes of a mostly silent thug who gets caught in a crossfire and is then saved by Julius Little, a charismatic leader of the 3rd Street Saints.
Hector says buenas noches.
The narrative here is pretty simple but effective. The Saints are presented as the lesser of all evils, a gang formed specifically to wipe out the Vice Kings, the West Side Rollers, and the Los Carnales, ultimately aiming to bring peace to the row. Like, it's a classic turf war story, but the execution was pretty solid. The writing balanced genuine grit with that early 2000s MTV-style swagger. You play missions like Aisha's Favor and To Kingdom Come that really set the stakes for gang warfare. And the gameplay loop is where the OG Saints Row tried to alter the open world formula. Like, it had a respect system, which was essentially a progression gatekeeper that forced you to engage with the open world before advancing the main story. Now, normally gatekeeping story progression is like a sin in game design, but they made it work with these side quests called activities. And these weren't some generic side quests, they were these absurd arcade mini-games, which kinda laid the foundation for everything that came after. Like, you have insurance fraud, where you literally throw yourself into oncoming traffic to rack up points and earn cash. It's actually really fun. Then you have Demolition Derby, which is pretty self-explanatory. There's also drug trafficking, where you ride shotgun and defend a dealer. And then there's Escort, where you drive around VIPs while avoiding news vans. You also have Hijacking, where you gotta steal vehicles like a semi-truck or some ultra-rare sports car. And the genius of these activities is that they gave you permanent upgrades like Infinite Sprint, which in turn made the exploration feel rewarding. But looking back at it today is a mixed bag. On one hand, the graphics have aged like milk. The bloom is physically painful to look at, and it looks like an early Xbox 360 title, which it actually is, but yeah. The physics engine is janky, the shooting mechanics lack any real weight or feedback, and the driving feels like steering a block of ice on a freshly waxed floor. But on the other hand, the level of detail is pretty impressive. The ambient NPC dialogues, the way the rival gangs dynamically patrol their territories, and an uncompromising ending where you're blown up on a yacht after being betrayed. I feel like it still holds up remarkably well, especially the narrative. Yes, it was a hollow experience gameplay-wise compared to modern standards, but as a foundation, it was exactly what it needed to be.
I'll tell Julius we're done here. Take Angelo's ride. I'll drive this back to your crib. You know what? I think Julius was right about you.
Released in 2008, Saints Row 2 took everything that worked in the original, threw away the tedious stuff, and then injected it with a huge dose of dark comedy. So the story picks up a few years after that yacht explosion. Your character, now fully voiced and officially dubbed the Boss, wakes up from a coma in a prison hospital. You then escape alongside a new character called Carlos and return to Stillwater only to find out that the 3rd Street Saints have been completely dissolved. The row has been gentrified by this sinister Ultra Corporation, and 3 new gangs, the Ronin, the Brotherhood, and the Sons of Samedi, have taken the city. The whole premise is basically a revenge story mixed with some violent corporate takeover. It's a game where you can dress up as a hot dog, drive a sewage truck to spray literal human shit all over suburban houses, and then transition into a story mission that's emotionally devastating. And I'm not kidding about the emotional weight. The narrative doesn't really shy away from the horrific consequences of gang warfare. Like when Carlos is chained to the back of a truck and dragged across until he's badly wounded, forcing you to put him out of his misery. Then like you have the Ronin violently murdering Aisha, Johnny's girlfriend, right in front of him. And you're also an absolute sociopath, like when you bury the leader of Ronin alive at a funeral and then tricking the leader of the Brotherhood into crushing his own girlfriend in a monster truck. It gets incredibly dark, intensely emotional, and ridiculous all at the same time. But this level of visceral storytelling gave this game a soul, which made you genuinely care about the characters. From a gameplay standpoint, it's still an absolute blast to play, despite its dated visuals and stiff animations. The combat was significantly tightened up, now with a melee and a dual-wielding mechanic. The open world of Stillwater was also completely revamped. The customization system remains one of the best, letting you tweak layers of clothing, change your walking style, select taunts, and even redesign the gang's vehicles and cribs. The activities were expanded to include trailblazing, where you ride an explosive ATV through the city, and Fuzz, which is like a parody of reality police shows where you use police brutality for camera ratings. The soundtrack was massive, featuring 11 different radio stations with a good mix of hip-hop, funk, and 80s music, and the entire campaign was playable in co-op. Out of all the games in the franchise, Saints Row 2 is my favorite. So moving into 2011, the franchise took an irrevocable turn. It represents the exact moment the series looked at its gritty roots and then completely sold out, both narratively and mechanically. It opens with the 3rd Street Saints no longer operating as a street gang, but as a global pop culture phenomenon. They have their own energy drinks, a clothing line, and they're robbing a bank while wearing giant bobblehead masks of their own faces. Well, things go sideways. The Saints are stripped of their assets by a massive criminal syndicate run by Philip Loren, and they're dumped into a brand new city of Steelport with absolutely nothing. Not gonna lie, this is where the fanbase started to violently fracture. On one hand, millions of new mainstream gamers absolutely adored this hyper-wacky direction, and it leaned completely into these absurd set pieces. Like just within the first hour, you're free-falling out of a cargo plane, dodging falling tanks, and shooting through the windshield of a rival aircraft. The game throws away the slow burn of taking over a city block by block and instead hands you military-grade hardware almost immediately. Hoverjets, aircrafts, and laser weapons are given out like free candy.
What? No, this is my fight too.
Girl, you don't get messy. Let us take care of business.
Fuck you, I'm doing this for Johnny.
It's also the game that introduced the Penetrator, a floppy purple dildo attached to a baseball bat that became this unmistakable mascot for the entire franchise. It costs 500 in-game dollars, delivers 500 damage, has a ragdoll force of 400, and is completely absurd. The marketing heavily relied on this ridiculousness, even introducing characters like Professor Genki, who hosts these lethal Japanese-style game shows in the middle of the city. The soundtrack was actually phenomenal, like when you drop into a penthouse party via helicopter and Kanye West is blasting in the background. So look, from a pure entertainment perspective, Saints Row III is an incredibly slick, highly polished arcade shooter that doesn't take itself seriously and only asks that you don't either. And in that regard, it absolutely nails it.
Don't get cocky.
But on the other hand, looking at it today, the cracks in the foundation are painfully obvious. The soul of the series was undeniably sacrificed for cheap laughs. The city of Steelport is a downgrade from Stillwater. It's a lifeless grid of identical industrial buildings and boring streets that lack any of the vibrant personality of the previous map. The customization was also heavily downgraded. Even worse, many of the beloved activities were gutted, and many of the story missions literally feel like activity tutorials disguised as narrative progression. The 3 new factions all felt like cartoon villains rather than actual street threats. The devs basically abandoned the plot from the first 2 games to focus on zombie outbreaks and fighting a military task force called Stag. Anyways, despite the outcries from actual hardcore fans who missed the gritty gang warfare, the game was actually a commercial success, selling 3.8 million copies in its first 2 months and over 5.5 million units overall. It proved to them that wacky sells, cementing a path of no return for the franchise. It was the death of the old Saints Row. If Saints Row 3 took the series to Hollywood, Saints Row 4 straight up strapped it to a rocket and fired it directly into the sun. Released in 2013, it was originally meant to be a standalone expansion called Enter the Dominatrix. However, THQ went bankrupt, leading to Deep Silver acquiring Volition and the whole franchise. Deep Silver desperately needed a full retail release to recoup costs, so the expansion was aggressively padded out and packaged as a mainline sequel, and the story here is completely unhinged. The boss has somehow been elected President of the United States after preventing a terrorist threat. Anyways, within the first 20 minutes, the Earth is invaded by an alien empire known as the Zin, led by the Shakespeare-quoting warlord Zinyak, and the boss is captured and thrown into a Matrix-style simulation of Steelport, and eventually, the Earth itself is literally blown up.
Salvation within the Zin Empire.
I'm smarter than all these people.
Delightful.
Casey, no! Protect the president!
I do love your spirit.
And this transition from a street gang simulator to a full-blown sci-fi superhero game was an absolute whiplash. Because the game takes place in a digital simulation, you now have reality-bending superpowers like super sprint, super jump, telekinesis, and these abilities completely rewrite the entire structure of the game. But not gonna lie, traversing the map by leaping over skyscrapers and running at Mach 2 speed is incredibly fun. But there's a glaring issue. Giving the player godlike superpowers in the first hour completely invalidates 90% of the game's own core mechanics. Why bother stealing cars, customizing vehicles, or engage in drive-by shootings when you can run faster than a sports car and throw tanks with your mind, right? And the entire concept of a gang becomes entirely meaningless. To be honest, the weapons are the only thing that keep the combat interesting because the guns are just as insane as the powers you get. Like you get the infamous dubstep gun, which fires literal sound waves of early 2010s wub-wub bass. Firing it at pedestrians forces them to breakdance and makes cars bounce on the beat of the music. The gameplay loop quickly devolves into collecting thousands of glowing blue data clusters scattered across the map to upgrade these powers, turning the experience into something closer to Crackdown rather than a Saints Row title.
Now what? This one's on the sand. And this one's because I want to.
Anyways, revisiting Saints Row 4 now feels like playing an extremely polished mod for the third game. The map is literally the exact same, just draped in a red and black alien filter that makes it visually exhausting to look at after a while. The story relies entirely on nostalgia, featuring loyalty missions that serve as homages to other classic games and bringing back old mechanics for self-referential jokes. You fight Zinyak in power armor at the end, rip his head off and take control of the Zin Empire. While the game sold well out of the gate, moving over 1 million copies in its first week, it also alienated the core fanbase permanently. The devs also forced themselves into this impossible narrative corner. Once the Earth is destroyed and you're the time-traveling ruler of a galactic alien empire, there's nowhere left to go. The series had effectively flatlined its own premise.
I can't believe I have to work a double.
So after a 9-year break, Deep Silver announced a reboot, which released in 2022. It was supposed to be a return to the roots, with the grounded nature of the second game and the absurd fun of the third. And the expectations were cautiously optimistic. However, the moment the first trailer dropped, there was this huge wave of backlash and well, the final game proved that it was entirely justified. Not gonna lie, this game is a disaster of biblical proportions, serving as a masterclass in how to completely misread a target audience. The writing in the reboot is, to be perfectly honest, some of the most insufferable, creatively bankrupt, and agonizingly cringe-inducing dialogue ever recorded in video game history. Your character and his 3 roommates form the new Saints. You have Eli, a nerdy podcaster who hates violence, Kevin, a shirtless DJ, and Nina, a mechanic. But instead of being hardened criminals fighting for survival, they're portrayed as hipsters complaining about student loans and rent, trying to start a criminal empire as a startup to buy a waffle maker. Like, what the fuck? Look, the ludonarrative dissonance here is completely off the charts. One second, the characters are whining about toxic capitalism. The next, they're killing hundreds of private military contractors and police officers in cold blood. The humor feels like it was written in a corporate boardroom by out-of-touch executives trying to guess what Zoomers find relatable and failing miserably. And cherry on top, it launched in an absolutely unacceptable state. Like, the gameplay is so bad, it's full of these weird-ass bugs and glitches. It actually makes no sense gameplay-wise, and it's not even worth talking about, so I'm not gonna. The devs probably just assumed that the Saints Row name itself would be more than enough. The financial reality, however, delivered the ultimate verdict. Despite a massive budget of $100 million, the reboot managed to attract just over 1 million. And this failure bankrupted the studio's goodwill, and in 2023 they officially shut down Volition, effectively killing the Saints Row franchise forever.
You didn't escape your punishment! You just delayed it!
While the whole gaming landscape moves pretty fast, the lessons of this franchise will linger for decades. It hopefully stands as a warning to publishers everywhere. When an IP strips away the very soul that made it beloved with sanitized corporate checklists and broken code, the core audience will simply reject it. Which is why I believe that there's still an immense value in revisiting the early titles today. They offer a flavor of this unapologetic gaming that the modern industry is just too risk-averse to produce. Anyways, thanks for sticking around with me, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.